All right, folks. Hey, welcome back. It's been a while. It's Sunday, which means it's stream time. I appreciate those who are returning after my long hiatus. Things are back to normal, so I'm feeling back to normal. Hope everybody's been okay. I am joined today by Bear the Gen X GM and the accounting DM. Some know him as Saxius.
Yeah, I mean, you could just call me that. That is what I'm known as.
Yeah, right.
It's who I really am.
No, what you're known as is death to players.
I'm sure your true name is written in binary, but
somewhere out there,
at
in
least
binary speech.
At least decimals. All right. So the topic for today is things that really don't work in tabletop RPGs, whether objectively or just subjectively, matter of opinion here. Whether that's mechanics, themes, styles of play, trying to emulate certain things from fiction or media or whatever. Just that's what we're going for. So I'm going to let you guys kick it off. I've got a couple of things in mind. Bear.
Well, okay. Facetiously, players. They don't work in games. You know what I mean? The GM works, and the players just show up and reap the benefits of that work and then shit all over it. But if I'm being unfacetious and real, the older I get, the more I want things reduced to a dice roll, and then we can move on. Right? I don't want hyper complex systems of mechanics that intertwine and roll some dice. All right, we got a number. Great. Let's move forward. So I think what doesn't work in RPGs for me anymore are quirky systems. When I heard about the Jenga Tower Resolution RPG, I was like, I'm done. I'm absolutely done. That's just nonsense. Just play fucking Jenga. Why are you interrupting my game with a Jenga moment? That's like that old Robin Williams line. I went to see a hockey game and a boxing match broke out in the middle of it. Well, that's how I feel.
I mean, I've played the Jenga game. It's Dread. It does what it sets out to do, and it's not trying to be a regular RPG. So, I mean, that in defense of the Jenga Tower thing, not that it needs defending, but it is not designed to be a conventional RPG. However, I do get where you're coming from, because more often than not, I'm looking for a system that is a framework that lets me splatter whatever paint I want on the canvas, rather than being this tightly woven tapestry where if I pull a thread, it unravels. Yeah, which is
or a paint by number game, where there's only a limited number of options, and if you don't do these options, well, the third edition D&D. You know, if you don't do the proper build, your character will suck at a later level, you know, and it's like, oh my God, stop.
Yeah. The entire game was pretty much, third edition. It was designed so that by the time you reach a certain level, if you didn't have at least certain characteristics, or if you hadn't at least optimized how your character was meant to be, or the class was meant to be played, you were going to be in for a time. Because, you would feel it. You would actually feel it in the game. The numbers would not be matching up. You would fall behind. The monsters were made to give you a challenge. And you could also go the other way, where effectively you would be so powerful that you would be steamrolling everything that should have been more or less prepared for you.
Yeah, I mean, that third edition was definitely one of those systems that was so crunchy that it did not forgive any misstep.
No.
I mean, comparing it to other D&Ds, sure, you didn't make your character optimal, but a lot of it came down to how you played your character, and therefore you could make up for the character sheet being problematic. So, Saxius, do you have anything in particular in your mind that you feel doesn't work?
Yes, I do. As a matter of fact, I've got a few. So, let's take. Oh no! Surprise! I'm a system nerd. So take any subsystems of a game that stops the flow. I'm going to be picking on Cyberpunk. Most not Cyberpunk, Shadowrun, because you have then got, thank you, in Shadowrun where you have suddenly got, okay, you're now going to go in and you're going to be doing hacking. And it's like, okay, this is now what's going to be going on here. And because you've jacked yourself in, time moves quicker for you, but slower for everyone else. And it's like, you're now having to like dial it down, and then you add in the magic system where you astrally project yourself, or you can now move, I don't know, like several hundred feet in a few seconds because you've got no barriers, no nothing to really stop you. And I always into the whole complicated situation where players be like, well, I can now move X amount of distance and nothing stops me. I can zoom around the entire place and just scout out the entire place. I went, I don't like that, because now I'm now having to like slow down time for everyone else. One player then gets the equivalent of like 3 turns of just 3 actions running around doing whatever they want. And then by the time that they jump back into their body, they will come out and just be like raving about like all these other things and be trying to catch the players up. And it's difficult because all the other players are sitting and listening to this. So I've always basically said, well, I'm not using the rules, what they're saying in here. It's a 1-for-1 situation. You jack yourself in, you've got all of the stream going through, but you're still human, you're not a computer, ergo it's going to be 1-for-1 to make it easier for me. So that way I can be in a situation where I'm having a gunfight, I'm having a guy that's hacking at the same time. I've got some the wizard having been shoved into a closet after he's astrally projected himself and is fighting whatever hell is happening in the astral world. But I'm keeping it all on the same level. I don't have to go, right, you now get 2 turns, you now get 3 turns, you now get 1 turn. Because this just drives me up the tree. Not because I can't keep on top of it, but because I find that it slows down the game. And that is what I don't want. I want my game to be slow.
There's ways to make those mechanics to where you don't have to do every little move. I think one of the things that I want to pull from Cyberpunk Red is the new net running mechanic, which gets rid of the dungeon crawl through the data fortress and just reduces it to a series of checks to get through the various levels of security. And it's done turn for turn, like you're describing.
But that's what we all did in 2020. None of us let net running happen as written in 2020 more than once. We did it once and went, what the fuck was that? Why did that take 3 hours?
We ended up with NPC net runners because of that.
Yep.
But
that was 2013. No PC net runners.
Where I was going with that is that's a choice to how you write the mechanics to show the theme. You could easily write it into your world. I hate when I get in a conversation in a group on the internet and they're like, well, that's how it works in the world. I'm like, yes, but that was a choice. That was a choice that the designers made, because they could have easily written that the reason that it goes 1-for-1, turn for turn is that the internet is complex. And yes, he is doing 1,000 things a minute, but so is the system, and therefore he can only accomplish X per turn, because that's a matter of choice when you write those rules. And so rather than adjust the theme to fit the more streamlined system of having it work in the same real time as everybody else, the Shadowrun folks are like, no, we're going to do this complex in early Cyberpunk. We're going to do this weird complex sub game for netrunners.
Yeah.
And it just ends up, like you said, stalling out the game.
Yeah. And like it also, like, I'm gonna continue with Shadowrun. It also goes out to like when you start having like the gadgeteers, the ones who've got all of the other smaller robots that follows along with them. It's to me, it becomes a whole case of like, okay, it's now you, and now you've now got all these other smaller ones. Like, just like it's a point where like I want to limit the play and say, listen, you can either have a really good one where you take a bunch of points, but I don't want you running around with like 5 mini robots to do all these other things, because now each of them has got to be given directives, and either that's going to clog up my time rolling through them, or you're going to be having to then sit and run through it. Go on, Bear.
What are you talking about? No one's mad about anything. Quit projecting your emotional state on our conversation, sir. We're saying these are things we don't like in games. Doesn't mean we're angry. Doesn't mean we're mad. Doesn't mean we're out there, let's burn our Talsorian to the ground.
He's saying don't make games that in different styles. Every game appeals to somebody. This is a matter of opinion and what we prefer and what we feel doesn't work. That may work for some folks. Even my buddy here, he makes that a good point with Shadowrun Netrunning. You could equate it to other games when you split the party, and other games you really don't cringe at that. So yes, it's nobody is saying we're mad.
What I'm saying is that this has an impact to the table, and I don't like that impact. The system is designed to have this, outcome. So I'm gonna again stick with the gadgeteer. He's gonna have 5 different, minor robots. Either I have to do 5 individual robot actions, or he's gonna, get 5 extra turns. But that still means it takes away from the rest of the group. I want to keep it down to that, one player has got his allotted number of turns, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less, depending on how you're going about it. But at the end of the day, I don't want to sit and we go through the entire table. One player then goes, "All right, and now we're going to spend 20 minutes just dealing with me." I was like, "Cool, I don't want that."
Yeah, I mean, question on that? When you're playing like D&D and stuff, do you split parties a lot?
Me?
Yeah, I mean, do you handle when your players split the party and stuff, right?
Yeah. So when they split the party, that's on them.
Yeah, but you still have to go back and forth, and I guess I'm playing devil's advocate here because the slowdown of net running and all of that, where and all of that, I guess in a way does equate to splitting the party, and I guess it's different than the rest.
So here's the difference from Shadowrun. When you are in the astral world, you get the equivalent of like 2 or 3 turns. When you do something like when you go into the astral world, you get more. You can do more because time is slowed down. You move quicker in the astral world. It's the same with net running. You get more, meaning that when I then have a split of the party within a Shadowrun game, and it's in the middle of a combat, we will go through. I would have to go through 2 turns of combat, and then go right. We're now putting that on pause, even though like one person is now up against a wall, about to be sliced, or they're now having to dodge a bunch of fire, and then turn over to the wizard, and then he's gonna have to do those things. I'd rather just have it 1 for 1, like go through, much like D&D, just like we roll through turns as they are. And then if the wizard can then fly around in the astral world, fine. But at least it's all done within a single turn. That's just me, because I don't want to again slow the entire thing down within an already, hectic moment. Because at least in my experience, Shadowrun can become very hectic once bullets starts flying and wizard starts doing spells.
Yeah, admittedly, I have not played a lot of Shadowrun because I don't like magic in my cyberpunk. But
no, I didn't like it. I didn't like it to begin with. But the more I played it, the more I just went, okay, well, the fantasy creatures are just humans with mutations. I can deal with that. I like 40k, so I can get behind this. The magic, okay, that's an aesthetic. You can take it out; it won't impact the world. You can even just say you can all play humans, and you can keep it as just a cyberpunk game with just all the mechanics from there. Still works. So, but that's my take on that.
Cool. One of the ones that I'm going to pick a thematic rather than sort of a mechanic here. I've been thinking a lot like how. So I've been listening to a lot of weird fantasy kind of stuff. Not dark fantasy, not sword and sorcery, but like the really weird Clark Ashton Smith, Jack Banther kind of stuff. And I feel like those weird fantasy settings don't lend well to tabletop RPGs. Not because the mechanics of them are hard, but because the weird is hard to play at the table. If I was to sit there and tell you that, you're going to go down to the, river of Sklor and, stir the nostrum to be able to speak to the blood priest of Zagag Bor and blah, blah, the word salad that often creates weird fantasy settings would require so much subtextual explanation at a table to where it could become cumbersome. It's fine when you experience it as a reader because you're just kind of along for the ride and you're reading it through, and the author eventually will facilitate context clues and stuff like that as you read it. But if you have a bunch of players sitting around the table and you're word salading your crazy weird world, with all of its hyphenated, weirdly syllabic words, I feel like you're gonna lose your players, and it just doesn't hit the same as if you're listening to or reading a weird fantasy.
Right. So effectively using a bunch of, as you said, word salad. So just like a bunch of words that doesn't immediately connect. You feel that you lose your connection to the world, if I'm understanding you right.
I feel your players get lost in the soup. And the problem is if you simplify it to try and make it, use regular terms, then you lose the weird. So it's what makes weird fantasy fun to read is the exoticism of finding this new world that's all this strangeness, high strangeness, and really weirdness. And then, and of course you get that peeled back as you listen to or read the author. And of course, that's through usually 90% through context, because there's very seldom any context or massive exposition. That's the other thing that doesn't work about it at the table. If I was,
This is why we take the time to write a setting document for the players to read, where that way we don't have to do massive expositions. But we now live in the Princess Snowflake player range where grognards are the same. Grognards bitch about the new players, but they're just as bad. I'm not here to read your novel. I'm just here to play the game. Well, then don't play my fucking game. If you're not willing to take the time to read the backstory that I've meticulously created for the world, providing you the salient information you just need to be familiar with and know exists, and you can refer to at later points, then go play a fucking Keep on the Borderlands for the 1500th time, and don't come to my game. Now, there's a difference between my game and a published game. I never played Skyrealms of Jorrune, Empire of the Petal Throne, Talisflantla, or any of the other weirdo woo-woo games because I wasn't invested in that writer's woo-woo. I wasn't going to run those games because I'm going to read them and go, well, I want to change this, I want to do this, I want to make this differently, and then I'm not playing their game anymore. I'm now doing my own thing again. So I get that. But players have no excuse other than their own laziness for not diving into lore if it is provided for them before the game, which prevents the need for info dumps during the game. That's all I'm saying. Yeah. And I know we don't all see eye to eye on this one, and I know we all live on different sides.
Not exactly what I was talking about, but I get you. So part of, I guess what I'm saying is it is difficult to get the weird fiction experience at the table.
I disagree.
I don't know.
If the people are willing to do it and they're willing to invest the time in reading the lore and familiarizing themselves with what's made available to them. Okay, first time
at that point though, you've already spoiled it though, because part of the whole weird fiction, genre is it being strange to the reader who is experiencing it.
And that's why we have the stranger in the strange land phenomenon, where we have the avatar of the reader being usually the protagonist who discovers this world through their eyes. You can achieve that. First time I ever played Elric, Stormbringer, back in the 80s, I had never read a Moorcock book. I knew nothing of the world. So I was like, well, I'll read this. Okay. And I read the description of each nation, and I went, Pantang sounds interesting. I'm going to be a guy from Pantang. And then we played the game, and I discovered the world, and I had a good time. But it was definitely not Greyhawk. It was definitely something different. And I think you can do that. But if you want the reader experience of the Strange New World, then yes, you're correct. That is a different thing. But this comes back to my constant argument about the difference between film, animation, radio, books, people at my door. It's, I got to go answer this. I'll be back.
All right.
Right, but I do get what you mean. It's difficult to bring something that is weird to the table where players doesn't get drowned out by it. However, what I often try to do is that when it needs to be weird, it needs to be a surprise. When the players have to be introduced into something at the beginning, yes, it has to be weird. There's got to be things, but then repetition is what I default back to. If it's a, as you said, the big coat of Yorkshire South, have that now be a thing that is said over and over and over, almost like a Pavlovian psychology method. You're now basically making the players bridge those connections, and now becomes a meaning. They've been fighting the cultist of Yorkshire Soft, over and over and over. You've been mentioning Yorkshire Soft several times over, and then at that point, it started out being weird. It continues to be weird because it's not just like, oh, here's a stat block of a monster, or here's something out of Cthulhu. It is a genuinely unnerving experience because every time there's something different that they have to encounter, keeping it inconsistent. But they will start equating the inconsistency with the weirdness. But it's again, to me, I would dose it down almost.
Yeah, so I guess where I'm coming from, and I'm not saying it's impossible to do. I'm just saying that it's one of those things that requires such a high degree of buy-in or just acceptance that it could be very cumbersome to play at the table. And I'm talking about like not just D&D or conventional fantasy setting with weird stuff thrown in. I'm talking about the very, very truly weird stuff that you
example.
Well, like anything by Clark Ashton Smith.
I never read any of his stuff, so you have to give me a better example than that. Sorry, I'm not relating.
I can't give you specifics off the top of my head because it is such a word salad of strange. Jack Vance's stuff is also very much like that, where everything in the world is described as something strange and extravagant. There's not a baseline of fantasy medievalism or anything in most of those settings, and not everything by Ashton Smith, of course, because some of his stuff he writes is in a much more conventional medieval setting. But the truly weird fantasy stuff, I feel. And you mentioned like Talislanta. Like I've tried to play Talislanta. I own Talislanta. I've owned a couple versions of it. There's so much going on in Talislanta that the best way to run it is to pick a corner of the world and play it there, because there's so much at play in this setting that players can easily, and the GM can easily get lost in what's there, because you have 100 and some odd different player characters. In there, it's crazy. And it's not that you can't. I mean, you can play a weird fantasy world. I guess what I'm saying is you have to turn some dials, because you either have to pare back the weirdness to where you do have more of a basis for understanding for the players, or you have to front load with a massive player primer or something to that effect, and then you have to hope that your players can access that and will access that. So,
but what I was going to say, the point I was going to make is it depends on the experience you want from the weirdness. If you want the Thomas Covenant experience of the character exploring the world with no frame of reference, then the player has to be ready for A, paying attention when you tell them things, and B, you have to be ready to give descriptions, not lore dumps, descriptions. You see the city before you. The walls look like they're made out of plaster, but baked white in the sun. You got to be verbose in how you describe things to the player to give them that sense of wonder and fantasy and extremism. You can, if they're doing the strange character in the strange land, the idea, you can use real world examples to give them touch base of it's similar to a blah, 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 blah. But this goes back to the verbose and descriptive DM, something we've gotten away from lately in the hobby and have started to see as a bad thing. You can't have DM should shut up and let the players do everything. And it's like, well, no, it's called group storytelling for a reason. Everybody has a place to play in there. Everybody has a thing to do. So you can do the weird stuff, but there's got to be investment from the players and there has to be effort from the GM. It's not easy. I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination.
It's definitely one of those things that would require the right group. Just like
the right play, the right group, the right everything. Yeah.
Just like I've said with mecha games, if you're going to play like an anime style mecha RPG, you have to play and you want it to feel like what it's actually supposed to feel like. You need to find people who are willing to look beyond giant stompy robot.
Well, yeah, it's like when I run superhero games. It's all about soap opera. And there are people who will play superhero game and all they care about is the superhero fight, to which I point, there's a game called HeroClix. You should look into it.
Yeah.
It gives you everything you want. Meanwhile, I'm running a campaign about superheroes, but there's a very strong soap opera element that's going to tie into all that. And if you're not willing to buy into that, then you're not here for the comic book superhero experience. You're here for HeroClix. So go play HeroClix.
I think there are a lot of very theme-heavy settings that I think the same concerns / strategies work for. Cyberpunk, actually, believe it or not, is one of those ones that if you're not into cyberpunk and you don't understand the genre, then you're just in there for chromey shooty bits.
Yeah.
And you're gonna lose all of the rest of it, because when you're playing, it should be about style. Your GM should be kind of verbose, describing the constant overcast and the massive neon and the shoulder-to-shoulder throng in the streets, and
the rain.
Yeah,
it's always night.
The neon lights.
Yeah. One of the biggest mistakes with the Cyberpunk 77 game there that came out from whatever they're called,
2077,
Cyberpunk CD Projekt Red.
CD Projekt Red was the first trailer. It's like, yeah. Why am I seeing the sun? Like when that subway, that SkyTrain comes out of the tunnel, and then suddenly we see Night City lit by the sun. I'm like, that's not Cyberpunk. Like Cyberpunk is night and dark. And if it's daytime,
is so messed up now, because evidence. So you have 2020, and then you have the fourth corporate war, which then leads to
the red,
which is before the video game. The video game, one of the reasons that it's so lit up, as far as I understand it, is during the kind of this weird reformation in Night City, where like they're fixing everything. And that might be why they chose to have this guy. Because it's not like they have the excuse of, well, we didn't want a game that was dark all the time. Yeah, that's never been a problem for anybody. Video games.
Look at Thief. You only play in the night. You only do your
Dead Space, all those other games where you're like cruising around in gloomy, dark, Morrowind. If you've ever played Morrowind and stuff like that, it's like rainy and swampy. And
they just listen. Not to side quest too far on this one. We have to accept the reality. They just wanted to make their own version of Grand
Theft Auto.
That's all they wanted to do, and they just threw a cyberpunk skin on it because they like cyberpunk, and that was it.
Well, to be fair, Grand Theft Auto works as a cyberpunk game.
Vice City is more cyberpunk than the 2077, but that's neither here nor there. The thing is that if you're going to go off the beaten path, if you're going to go away, so you said people that play cyberpunk that only just want to be there for the chrome shootout, they love the Black Hands guide where they can build their gun that fires depleted uranium rounds and does 4x10 per shot and whatever. That's great, good for them. Let them do it. Let them. But at some point in time, two things are going to happen. People are going to fuck with them, take away their ability to feed themselves, take away their ability to house themselves. They'll have no one to talk to, nothing to do with, because they're not doing the cyberpunk stuff. They're just doing the violence. And eventually, what was originally called C-SWAT and then gets renamed MaxTac in 2020, it's going to show up and deal with them. And I don't care how tricked out your character is. I'm the GM. I can give 20 guys just as tricked out as you from C-SWAT, and they're going to take you out.
A lot of that stuff is it's pretty regulating as well. Because fine, you made your gun that shoots the super high, heavy depleted uranium rounds, and it's $1,000 a bullet now. Yeah, it's like, because I remember I had some players who did. But going back to the point, I guess because of course my whole thing about the weird fantasy, I guess it's more a matter of, you could pair that back to heavily themed games, and heavily stylized games can be tricky to run at a table unless you have players and a GM who are willing to buy in. You need to have a GM who's able to navigate all of that heavy theme, and like Bear was saying, be verbose and describe things. But you also have to have players who are willing to let the GM describe things and not get bored and antsy and get irritated and just go, "Oh, shut up! I'm just going to shoot him," or I attack the orc kind of mentality. You have to have buy-in from both sides, and you have to have a certain level of skill. And I'm going to harp back on it because mecha games has been like I'm a big fan of mecha anime, and none of those shows are just about the giant robot. They're like Bear was saying with superhero games, they're very soap operatic. There's often heavy themes of war and and loss and all of this stuff going on, or some other theme that is the main bit of the story. But you're very rarely going to find players. We lost the bear. We're very rarely going to find players who want to invest in that angle of the game. They just want to get out in their giant machine and fire, deluges of missiles at enemies and pew pew their way through the battlefield. So going back to Weird Fantasy, if you're going to be playing in the world where everything is described as 3 hyphens and 14 different consonant vowel combinations that don't make sense in the English tongue, you have to have players willing to sit back and let you explain and exposit those things. So
yeah, but as a DM, you also have to make it easier for them, like handouts, like notes. What I've done in some of my campaigns is, again, I use Roll20. I'll do a handout where I go, here's a new word for you, or here's a new term. I will then have a document where every new term is listed there along with a definition and explanation for what they are, so that they can defer back to it. And then if the players are willing to then put in the effort, just like I've been willing to put in the effort to make the world, then they can go back and review it. Yes, it moves into the world of you're giving the players homework, but at the very same time, is it each week when you ask them, what happened last session? Is that not also homework? You're asking them to remember what they learned and explored last game.
Yeah. There is a lot of cases where you may not be able to prep them for everything, obviously, because a lot of it is, again, there's still, to make it feel like it is, you either have to pare back the weird language stuff, or you have to, there's going to be stuff that comes up on the fly that you're going to just have to, explain. And I feel like the best way to do that kind of exposition is something real quick and throwaway, or affectations that they can understand, and then give it a weird name, like the Red Wizards of word salad. That because their brain will fill in Red Wizard, and then they know we're dealing with wizards, and then you're going to give it some sort of weird fantasy name, and then they can move on.
But I think we made the point at the very least.
Yeah.
There's another thing that I also want to bring up. It's both something I like, but also something I dislike. So, on the topic of like word salads and the like, think of tabletop games set in established worlds. Like we've got Forgotten Realms, we've got Birthright, so on and so on. But we've also got Warhammer 40,000. We've also got The Witcher. These are also games now set in a universe where it's not easy to just say, right, come into this game. It's all right to know nothing. Some of these games you almost have to come in pre-prepared for what you're going into. It doesn't have to be ridiculously level, having sat and watched 12 hours of lore videos, but you do need to understand what the universe and what the world is going to be like. I'll use my Saturday group as an example. We sat and we were discussing the new game we're going to be having, and I threw out, why don't we play The Witcher? And I had one guy who absolutely wanted to love it, and the rest of the group just went, we've no idea what The Witcher is about. We just know a little bit about the books. It's like, okay, well, this is going to be a problem. If I don't have the entire group knowing what the world's like, it's going to be a problem to get them into the world, because it's a very Slavic-inspired world, and if they are not familiar with that, or at least the lore of Eastern Europe, then, or the history of Eastern Europe, then it's going to take a lot more to get them submerged into the world.
Yeah, again, those are also very heavily themed, and in the case of The Witcher, it's not super heavy themed in that it's still kind of basic medievalism at its core, but there's a lore that is not as commonly known by a lot of people, comic stuff. A lot of people are very familiar with Egyptian, Norse, Celtic.
Mhm.
But yeah, when it comes to Slavic, there's not a lot of folks who are all, I mean, outside of the region who are overly knowledgeable. And then, of course, you mentioned also, what else? What was the other one? You said
Warhammer?
Warhammer. Yeah, Warhammer is its own mess, anyways, because it's got lore that has changed over time.
Oh, definitely, and it's also got huge contradictions, and just like it's just illogical at times when you break down and you look at closely, you look at how it actually functions. You sit and go, why is this working? This should not be working. This should be collapsing upon itself. Why is it not going?
Yeah.
Why is this not happening? So again, but that's a part of the buy-in, is that you need to know that like it's just so big that it won't make sense, and that's fine.
Yeah, I think the key thing there is if you're playing in that setting, at least nobody in the world of Warhammer knows how it works either.
Or it's a tip: don't let your cats play near the power bar.
Oh, yeah, that'll happen.
They'll full on roll over and turn it off for you.
All right. So moving along, anything else that folks feel doesn't work well or is tricky to pull off in tabletop?
Horror
Or
has always been hard to pull off in tabletop.
yeah. I mean, it is. I mean, it is and it isn't. I mean, I don't believe that you're ever truly going to get people actually scared, and I'm not even sure it's something that you should be seeking.
So when it comes to horror, I don't expect the players to actually feel terrified. I don't expect them to feel anxiety or anything like that, because I know me as a player, I would sit there and go, I am playing this meatbag of a character. They're just numbers to me, and I'm gonna do this and do that, and until my sanity reaches certain points, I will then keep to that tactic and then adjust as I go along. But that's me. Others will do it for the sake of the role playing or the exploration of the existential crisis and so on and so on. But like horror in itself is something that I don't go out of my way to do. It's a byproduct of what I present. I will present like monstrosities and mechanics where the players don't understand it and they're scared, because now they're like, what are we dealing with? What's happening here? And yeah, I know horror can be fun, but like it's never the objective for me. It's a byproduct which contributes to the game. So I can't.
I've had tremendous luck with horror, but it's been luck. It's been players buying in, the timing being right, and the campaign hitting on all cylinders. I don't consider Call of Cthulhu horror. I consider it psychological, maybe terror. But ultimately, everyone goes into Call of Cthulhu with the same goal, knowing their characters cannot survive. Well, if you know your characters can't survive, then like you said, they just become a bag of points that I will try to avoid losing sanity with. But if you go into a chill game, or just, a Savage Worlds horror companion game, and you're playing a real character, you have in the back of your head the idea that I can beat this. I'm smart enough to survive the zombie holocaust. I know how to find the vampire. I know how to do this. I know how to do that. So when you start losing because character agency gets taken away, fantasy empowerment becomes fantasy unempowerment or disempowerment. You might start having emotional reactions at that point in time if you're really invested in the game and the character. And I think that is where horror can live. But in general, it doesn't work. I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I think with Call of Cthulhu, one of the key things too, if you want to make it a more of a horror game as opposed to just survival, you have to run it as a campaign. You have to run it where players have a chance to get invested in their characters.
Yeah.
Because then they'll start to worry. If you're running it as a one shot, nobody's going to care. Unless they're really invested into the game. And my only success is with truly getting people to act in a horror style. The cat.
That's horror.
He turned off the camera.
He's all in trouble. and he knows he's in trouble because he just got yelled at. So now it's like I'm not sorry, but I don't like that you're not being really awesome towards me. So now I'm going to be really sucky until you're awesome towards me again. I don't know what I did wrong. I did nothing wrong. I'm a cat. Isn't that right, buddy? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. But no, I mean, the only time I've ever been able to get the party to react in a truly like fearful way, like have reactions that were spawned out of worry and concern, was in an Alien game where they ended up killing their officer because they thought he was an alien coming around the corner, not the xenomorph, but the players are like, and I throw my grenade and I shoot, and I'm like, and your lieutenant stumbles out of the mist, out of the steam and the smoke, and falls to the ground full of holes. And then they're like, oh crap, what do we do now? Kind of a thing. It's very rare that you're ever going to have people who are truly worried and scared. You're going to get people who are creeped out and weirded out, and that's what I think most people confuse as horror in the games. Because you can, Yogg suddenly appears. Yes, John will do his creepy voice, and he'll get close to the camera, and he'll have the NPCs operate in ways that are truly like disturbing. But I'm not so sure that that's actual horror as much as it is just squick.
It's uncomfortableness. It's disassociation, right? But the thing is, okay, so you talk about people getting invested. In '95, I ran a cyberpunk game. They wanted to play Colonial Marines fighting xenomorphs. And I said, okay. And we played. And they spent the whole night running around this colony complex chasing this thing on their motion tracker. Chasing it. A couple of them got taken out, sucked into a vent, and they're gone. Whatever. And then they got outside when they traced it to the outside. And they couldn't see it. And it's like, right in front of you, man, but I can't see it, man. And the players were starting to get spare. And then I described the 3 dots of the laser tracking across one of their chests. And I watched 4 men in their 20s stand up and go, what the fuck? It's a fucking predator. We're fucking dead, man. And they just had a complete breakdown for like 5 minutes as I just sat there waiting for them to calm down, and then proceeded to slaughter all their characters. But the point is in that moment, they were expecting xenomorphs. They spent the whole game hunting xenomorphs in their mind, and then it turned out it was a predator that was actually hunting them the whole time, and the players had an emotional fucking reaction.
Yeah. But look what it took. It took for you to pull a full-on gotcha to get that out of them. And
I believe the term we use these days is subversion of expectations.
Exactly.
Ryan Johnson.
But Bear's frozen again. Your camera.
No, my camera keeps freezing. I don't know what the fucking cat did.
Your cat is hacking your system.
Yeah, he's mad at me now. Hacky hack.
But no, it is more frequent when you run horror to have players act intentionally contrary to the horror that they should be feeling. At least in a lot of my experience. Part of it is they're playing an RPG, and I feel like a lot of players feel they have to do the thing in the horror setting because they're playing the game, and to a certain degree, that's true. You have to conceive that we're here to do, the spooky stuff. So I have to have my character do the spooky stuff. But at the same time, that then kind of subverts the horror, because if you're making your character go and investigate the thing that is terrifying because that's the game you're playing, that kind of relieves you of some of the tension and the dread that you might have if you're acting in a more natural state.
Yeah, I agree with that. All right, I've replugged all the camera stuff. Let's see if this fixes it. If not, I'm angry. For the rest of the day, I'm just going to be angry. But yeah, horror is a hard one. And anyone, I don't agree that Ravenloft is horror. I really
not in
don't.
D&D, no. I mean, it's horror themed, but it's not horror because it's D&D, which doesn't really support horror. It's horror. It's D&D with horror trappings. So it's kind of like Buffy isn't exactly horror, even though it's got all of the horror tropes, right?
I literally ran an adventure for my Buffy group. So I started the Buffy campaign. They were college students. Every time an authority figure showed up, they started lipping off and being really, really aggressive. And going, why don't you call the cops on me then? And I'm like, this isn't working. So between sessions, I said, hey guys, I'm going to switch your characters. And you're going to be high school kids instead. And they're like, okay. And they got into playing high school kids. And then suddenly authority figures had authority over them and all that kind of stuff. And then I wound up doing their spring break adventure, where March break or whatever you guys call it in the States, where they wound up going to this island that's nearby the town called Cobbett's Cove. And they're going to go have their adventure. And it's a big, all the high schools go to Cobbett's Cove and it's a big thing. And I ran The Fog, John Carpenter's The Fog on them.
Yeah.
They were shitting themselves. Because they'd been fighting vampires and a spooky, headless horseman, and they were all good. Misty Fog with ghost pirates really fucked them up. They were incapable of coping with it. But you're right, it's not horror. It's horror, comedy, adventure, action. It's got so many other tags that attach to it.
Yeah, I mean, and of course, horror is one of those things that can be tacked into other things easily enough. You could do superhero horror. It would be tricky.
It's tricky.
Yeah. But ultimately, because a huge part of horror is powerlessness, or at least the serious disparity in power level. Even in Aliens, which is more of an action movie, the Marines end up ultimately all of their tech counts for nothing.
So, but here's the thing where games, okay, we went to see Aliens 1985 or whatever it was that came out that summer. We went to see it. And one of our buddies who was with us, Sebastian, is a massive Traveler guy. Like, he was Traveler's the only sci-fi. Every other sci-fi is shit and stupid, and Traveler. So we walked out going, damn, that was cool. We want to play that. And he's like, it's a Traveler Marines and battle dress training scenario, whatever. And we're just like, man, can you just let go of your horse shit for 5 minutes to appreciate what was there? And that's the kind of person that will never work in a horror game because they're incapable of letting go of their bullshit. So I think a lot of horror gaming is going to come down to not only a good referee, obviously, but players who are willing to buy in and let go of their horse shit and let the tension happen.
We had a Beyond the Supernatural game going on back when it first came out. And my friends and I would play that. We were still in our teens and stuff, late teens, but we'd sit there and we'd play it late into the night and just on those marathon sessions. And I would say we got to a point where we sort of creeped ourselves out at times, because I remember we were done playing and it was time to go to sleep. And then we realized that the living room we're in has these giant windows that face the dark woods. And we're like, your parents never put curtains in each window. That's kind of a thing.
Well, this is something I was telling you. We were talking about horror films the other night on my channel. Last night I was talking on Bamp's podcast about horror films. The movie Paranormal Activity, right?
Yeah.
I watched. I was like, the original cut, not the theatrical cut. And I was like, that's a pretty good movie. I enjoyed that. And I got my girlfriend to watch it, and she's like, this is stupid. My sister and I are laughing at it. And I'm like, okay, whatever. 4 a.m, my phone fucking rings. Oh, what's up? I can't sleep. I'm thinking about that film. And I had to wind up staying up until the sun came up with her on the phone so she could go to bed finally, right? So sometimes horror, like you said, it's not in the moment you feel it. It's later.
There have been plenty of times where I've seen something, and not necessarily the most frightening movies to be sure. Like my wife and I went and saw Signs in the theater, right, when it first came out. And we sat in the dark theater, and it was a really late showing. And then we had to drive home, and winding up and down those windy Northwest streets that always have, everything's trees in the Northwest, right? So you're just your headlights and the dark streets. And we look at each other and kind of jokingly, we're like, we're going to pull into the carport here, where the garbage cans are. I'm like, if a raccoon pops out of our garbage cans, I'm gonna scream like a girl and pee myself.
Oh yeah.
Because it's that whole movie is what's on the edge of what you see. It's the fleeting glances.
But this is
little
the thing
sounds.
that role playing, you need good role players who are invested and a good storyteller for horror to work, because they have to be willing to suspend disbelief and let their emotions carry them. That tension builds up, that feeling of, I swear to God, man, if I open that door and he says like a shadow walks by or something, I'm just going to shit myself and shoot my character in the head. You need that.
One of the scariest moments in video games for me, like chilling moments, wasn't getting attacked by zombies or anything like that in Resident Evil. It's in the one part of, I can't remember which Resident Evil game, but you walk into a hallway, and as soon as the camera comes on again, for the briefest moment, you see something crawl across the brick wall outside the window at the end of the hallway. You just fleeting little glance on the edge of your vision. You don't have long enough time to really see what it is, and you don't run into that thing forever. But now you know it's there.
Yeah, good luck going to sleep knowing that thing is there.
Yeah, you know that thing is there, and so you're playing the rest of the game like, when the fuck is that thing going to show up? That wasn't a zombie. Zombies don't Spider-Man crawl across the wall.
Except when they do, apparently.
Yeah, and it ends up being the liquor, which is the gnarly thing with the big old whip tongue that shows up later on in the church. But no, it's those are the moments, and those are things you can pull off in tabletop horror pretty easily, because as a GM, you can use those subtle, horrific, spooky little moments, like the players are in a room doing, a search for clues, and you can also include a little blurb that while you're looking around the study, checking the bookcases, checking the desk and stuff, you notice a shadow move across the window, and then leave it at that, and let your players sit there and speculate and extrapolate and freak the shit out of themselves while they're trying to figure out what the shadow was. It may have been nothing. It could have been a bird. It could have just been the clouds shifting in front of the moon, but it also could have been, a fish man.
Okay, well, look, we horror is clearly difficult. What other stuff doesn't work in TTRPGs? Before Saxius has a hemorrhage, because we're literally walking the line of the topic, which must be very anxious for him. Speaking of horror,
I would say the one thing, probably one of the biggest boogeymen in tabletop gaming, is anything that dips a toe into romance between characters. Most players just simply don't want to play it, in my experience, or aren't able to play it. So if you want to bring it into the game, it is difficult. Unfortunately, in a lot of genres, it is really part of the genre. How many fantasy stories exist where there isn't some sort of at least low-key love interest, or even if we get out of romance, deep emotional context between characters? That is almost never going to exist at the game. I've played in very few tabletop games where somebody was truly attached to another character, NPC or otherwise, where they really felt bad when that character. I mean, it's happened when the play, oh, such and such, the fighter is dead. Usually you're like, all right, roll up another one. But there are very few characters, and of course it depends on the game. D&D is not the best place for that, but usually you have the hero death. But I think anytime you have a player that wants to romance an NPC, or you have two players that decide that they want to have a romance between their characters, whatever, it is very rarely functional at the table. And part of that just comes down to who's playing the characters, and
yeah, it's just one of those things that doesn't really come up in my games. It's not something that me as a DM I try to bring up, it's something that I will leave for the players to either develop, or they will develop their own attachments and their own likeness towards certain characters or NPCs or each other. But even then, like whenever it gets to like, oh, we decide to hold hands, so I'm like, okay, cool. But if you want to take that further, we'll just cut to black and whatever.
Well,
happens,
I'm not saying of the physical aspects of it, but
right.
I think where it really became apparent to me was when I started playing White Wolf games back in the day.
Yeah.
Especially with Vampire, because vampires are supposed to be all emotional and deep into it and stuff like that, and everybody would try to play their characters, I want to love you, but I cannot love you because I am a monster, kind of a thing, right?
Right.
And it would feel so cheesy, and it would be so poorly done. Or the opposite side of it, it was so superficial and kind of cringe that it just was kind of
As I said, I just leave it for the players to like develop it themselves. Like I've had, when I played Vampire the Masquerade, I had a Bruja who had a human girlfriend, but he hid the entire thing. But we didn't really bring it up because it wasn't important. The other thing that was important was the coterie, or the fact that I would then say like, okay, and I go back, and then that evening I spend it with my girlfriend. I do whatever, and then that's me done for the rest of that night. I was like, that's it. Like, but I don't.
Really becomes fuel for the GM or downtime activity.
Yeah, like, but that's me. That's me as a player, and as a DM. Like again, the whole romance thing, like it's either something I can use to further events for the character, or it's things I can use to like take away from the characters to create drama, or to create moments of vulnerability for them, psychic attacks and all that. But otherwise, like I leave it for the players to deal with it in their own way, and I usually sort of like step in when I think it gets weird. But yeah, like otherwise I don't encourage it, I don't do it. But it's just because I don't know how to do it. Me as a person, I'm not a very emotionally aware person. In case that, if that makes sense, like giving a really good example, when I was told at one point, like someone wanted me to be more vulnerable, and I didn't understand what they meant by that, so I looked up the dictionary and I equated vulnerable to being weak. I responded back with, "Why would I want to be weak?" So, like, I am. To me, it just doesn't make sense because it just doesn't equate into my head.
I do feel in most games that it really actually works better away from the table, and as a background element. Taking it to superhero games, for example, Bear, right? A lot of superhero characters have a significant other, whatever form that takes, whether that's a girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, old Aunt May, which isn't necessarily romance, but it's still a serious emotional attachment. And usually that's kept off the table. Like, occasionally they might end up in the line of fire, which is, I guess, how you can also work it at your table. But you don't want to turn that character's emotional investment into a constant trick that you're playing against the character as well.
No.
So, I when 5th edition came out with their downtime rules in Xanathars, which I thought were kind of cool. I actually started tinkering with a system for romance, like a mechanical system for it. And then later on, they came out with something for that in the one Magic School campaign that they did for 5th edition. So I didn't have to do the work anymore. But finding ways to do it mechanically and have it function in the background and have it be something that is game affecting is, I think, the best way to do it. But yeah, there are some genres where it's important to have. I think if you're doing anything very heavily gothic, not goth, but gothic style, like, there's so much deep, heavy feels in gothic storytelling that your players have to have something, whether it's your beloved cousin Agnes, or you have to have something. Otherwise, you're just, again, playing a very two-dimensional character. And it's a landmine. It's a minefield to play around too, because you run the risk of having that player who wants to really play it at the table, and then you're like, no, dude, we're not here for that.
Fade to black, baby. Fade to black.
Exactly. And that's not what we're here for. But so that would be one that I, thinking about other things that came to my mind is romance, or even broader, like deep feels, because it doesn't necessarily have to be romance. A lot of players are not willing to also play the character who is like seriously really worried about their old Uncle Pete, who needs help, and needs to be visited weekly to make sure that they're okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm trying to fix my camera.
That's okay.
Go ahead, Sax.
No, I had nothing. I just went, yeah, it's like, again, this is just one of those topics where I just go, well, I don't include it. I leave it for the players to deal with. I only step in when I feel like it's overstepping the bounds where I would think it acceptable, and then that's about it. Like, it's just in my parameters as a DM, as a robot, I just go like, yeah, well, it's not for me to really work on.
No, but making the characters care about NPCs is a good thing if you do it right.
Yeah.
And you saw that Friday night, Sax, watching the heroic game.
Yeah.
Like, I literally had, people are like, I'm getting comments from the players going, I want to find a way for us to fix the relationship with Beetle. I feel bad about what we did to Beetle. It was like, well, okay, let's blue book it and see what happens. But
several sessions of you doing it already. But yes.
Exactly. You guys made this bet. Enjoy it.
Yeah.
So one real quick question. Is there anything that is frequently already done in games that you feel really doesn't work well? Is there a topic or a storyline or an element that is pretty continuously included in tabletop RPG stuff that doesn't really land as frequently as they would, as authors would like it to?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, I'm not following the question.
So, just example, combat is in almost all RPGs to some extent, and it works pretty well because it's a mechanical thing. Are there any particular plot lines, threads, types of mechanics that you see pretty frequently that do get used, and we're not talking about hypotheticals, but actually get used and don't really tend to work that well or are very difficult to pull off? My personal opinion on that would be political intrigue.
Yeah. Political intrigue, the moment you become a lord, you get to have the manor. Once you get to the whole name level in D&D or whatever it is, like, even if you just go into like Shadowrun and be like, I now own an entire corporation. Great. Are you actually going to sit and go through the corporate bullshit and the meetings? Because I know I would. I'd put you through that hell.
Yeah, you
but
would.
but I also know that the majority of my players do not want that. I have one player that I sat down and I built his fancy business with the whole expenses, ins and outs, and the all of that to be done. And I had another player who has a manor. The player straight up said, I do not want to do anything of that level, Oscar. I just want this to be there, and then whatever I have to pay, if I have to go adventuring to get the money to do it, I'll do that, but I don't want to deal with this. So I gave him an NPC steward, and I basically went, put him in charge, and then we'll take it from there. And then that's what ended up happening, and they quite enjoyed that.
Since I know we're on the timer, I'm sick of heist adventures because they don't work. What makes Ocean's 11 or The Italian Job or any heist movie great is that moment where they're describing the heist and we're watching it play out like it's supposed to play out in perfection, and then we realize something's gone wrong or whatever the case may be. You're never going to get that experience at a tabletop. And players are always going to be like, no, I would have been prepared for that. And it's just like, oh, Jesus Christ.
Yeah, there is or are now a couple of game systems that are written specifically for heists and have figured out how to do that. Blades in the Dark is one of them.
Yeah.
But it's got this whole system of basically flexing on some sort of meta currency to create those insights. Yeah. But that's a whole game written just for heists.
One style of adventure.
Exactly. So yeah, for me, I think the problem, like with political stuff, like I mentioned, is that I think a lot of players either don't want to play it and don't care. So like if it's in your game, then it's a miss. That goes to the buy-in thing. But I don't think a lot of people are really well versed, both GMs and players, as to what actual political machinations look like. It's often done in such a very uh, cosmetic way.
Yeah. Yeah, but yeah. Like political intrigue is just one of those. Like it's a guessing game. You guess what other people are going to be doing. You're going to have to go and get the thing. It's tedious. It's not booking. You need a player that's willing to pay attention to the details. You need players that are willing to like go out, gather all of this, come back, compare the nodes, make their adjustments, go out, gather more, so on and so on. It's again, me as a DM, I love doing it. Me as a player, I love doing that. But it's just one of those like the people you're going to find that are like that are like 1 in 10. Majority of people want a chill beers and chip game, which I'm not opposed to. But you gotta be very upfront about what you want, and like the expectations I would have versus what another player would have are very different.
Yeah. Well, I think it's safe to say, throughout the entire conversation here, that ultimately any one of these things that we brought up is not an impossibility. It's just a matter of the level of commitment and detail and trouble that you want to go through to make it work, but also the right chemistry between players and GMs. I think a lot of the problems come down to GMs trying to run things that they frankly aren't qualified to run. And that's not a dig at anybody. But everybody has strengths and weaknesses, and some people try to bite off more than they can chew. Also you have to worry about players who may or may not truly be invested in stuff. Going back to my original point on the weird fantasy, you might have players who are like, oh yeah, that sounds really fun, but after like 3 sessions of word salad, world description, there's like, all right, this is getting tedious. Yeah. It's like, I feel like I'm in Dr. Seuss rather than an actual RPG. So I think ultimately any game decision comes down to players, rule set, and the GM, and ultimately that combination of willingness and ability. And certainly anybody can get better at a thing, but you're in a lot of these situations, you're going to stumble many times before you actually can make before you can actually run them. Horror is going to fall flat a number of times before you actually have that one moment, like Barrett described. So more often than not, it's just pure luck. You time things just perfectly, whatever. Political stuff, you may end up with. Here's the problem with a lot of these things too, is as a GM, you might want to run them, and then you could run into the player who's much better at it than you are. And then where are you at? Like, well, I thought my political storyline was opaque and dense, and you proved it to be nothing but a tissue paper doily. Overly complex in appearance, but tears apart rather easily.
Paper tiger.
I mean, that's always the thing. I mean, I think we've all been there with games. We're like, all right, I've got this really cool thing set up, and you get to the table, and your players are like, there's a mystery or whatever. Your players are like, it was the dude, and you're like,
no, it was not the dude. No,
J.J. Abrams, real quick. You're like, no, they're not actually in purgatory. Oh wait, they're actually in purgatory. That was
the Cylons. They have a plan. This is their plans to do this. No, what's their plan? I'm not telling. Ever.
Abrams is a hack.
I love players, but I hate players at the same time. You know what I mean? Because they will like. I find as I get older, the people I play with don't do this anymore. But when I was younger, especially my 20s, everybody wanted to be right. And instead of doing what their character would do or knowing what their character would know, they did what they knew, and they would do what they wanted. And as a result, there was moments like that, like And even I did it. I mean, I did it as a player. The only one who could be behind this is, Baron Dread. And the GM's like, no, it's not. It's not Baron Dread. No. And he's like, okay, it was clearly Baron Dread, but I figured it out too quickly. Right?
Yeah, I would say like one little last note on that. I mean, if they figure out who your bad guy is, or they figure out the mystery too early, roll with it. Fine, they figure it out. Now what are you going to do about it?
Okay, cool. Just because doesn't mean you can't stop it.
Actually, nothing's better than having them, already know it's Baron Dread, and then have Baron Dread show up. So you've discovered the truth about me. Well, have fun getting anybody else to believe it.
I like it. I like it when the players figure it out, because again, I make my decisions. I stick to them. If the players figure out, that's great. They're brilliant. And yeah, sometimes sometimes they're right. Sometimes they're just so dead wrong. But it's hilarious if they follow through with it and make the wrong accusation.
That's always the crapshoot with players, though. It's like, especially when it comes to mysteries, they could be completely right and figure it out in no time, or they can spend 3 sessions trying to figure out what the significance of the loaf of bread on the kitchen counter was when it was just a loaf of bread on the kitchen counter.
Yeah.
It's like, no, dude, it was just a loaf of bread. I promise you.
I swear to fuck, the blue notebook means nothing. Stop obsessing about the blue notebook. Yeah. We've all been there.
Exactly. All right. Well, this has been a fun topic, a fun conversation. I'm going to have to get rolling today. Thanks for joining me, guys.
My pleasure.
Technical issues and all.
Don't even get me started, man. But anyway, I'm going to be streaming a bit later, but not with my face and my voice. I'm working on Claricon characters and handouts today, so I'm going to probably just throw up a music stream. So if people want to come by and chat, they're more than welcome to.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks for coming on, guys. Everybody, have a good day.
Peace, love, and geek.
All right.
Later.
Take care.